This video is a step-by-step guide to actually building and assembling a PC.
The first thing you need to do is prepare the backplate. The backplate is provided with your motherboard. Line up the backplate with the motherboard itself and ensure that the options you have on your motherboard have the appropriate flaps removed from the backplate. Then firmly secure the backplate in the case chassis. Place the motherboard in the case and line it up with the backplate. This will allow you to see where you need to install the mounting spaces which secure the motherboard to the case. The case I'm using uses square spaces that clip in by pushing them through the square hole in the underside of the case's motherboard tray. More commonly, screw-in spaces are provided. Ensure all spaces line up with holes on the motherboard to prevent the motherboard getting shorted out. The heatsink we're using was provided with a backplate that needs to be secured before the motherboard is installed in the case. Next, install the CPU. Refer to your motherboard manual for individual CPU installation guides. The Socket 775 CPU that I'm installing gently sits on top of pins and is keyed with notches so it can only be installed one way. The securing bracket on the motherboard clips down easily. The fans I'm using were provided with self-tapping screws. I'm using these screws to secure the fan guards to the fans. When screwing them in for the first time, be careful not to do it too fast or over-tension them, as you may strip the thread from the plastic fan housing. Plan where you want your power connectors for your fans to go when you install them. This will allow you to make any appropriate holes in the chassis and will allow you to make decisions about which way to install the fan, to keep its wires as neat as possible. Also plan the airflow of the case. In this setup, the rear fans are exhaust fans and the front fans are intake fans. This will allow for constant airflow from the front to the rear of the case. The Lanley PC70 case comes with a separate backplate for installing the power supply. The backplate makes for easy installation and removal of the power supply. Because I have the case completely disassembled, it's easier for me to install the backplate first. Next, we install the power supply. Make sure you have the power supply up the right way. Installing the power supply upside down in the case is the right way up. The intake fan will be sucking air from the inside of the case and blowing it out of the rear. If we had the power supply around the right way, the intake fan would be restricted by the top of the case. Most of the time, the exhaust fan on the case on the rear of the power supply will line up with the circular area on the back of the case. The next thing I'm doing is preparing the case cables. These are power connectors for the front panel LEDs and power switches. I'm using heat shrink available from most electronic stores to neatly bundle these cables together. The LEDs and power buttons should neatly clip back into place if they have been removed. If you do remove things like this, make sure you keep all the screws and clips together, as they are usually unique. You might want to refer to your motherboard manual for the correct pinout for your front panel connectors. Some motherboards are actually screen printed with this information, but your motherboard manual is the best source for that information. MSI provided a pin header plug with the motherboard itself. It makes it a little bit easier to plug in all the stuff for your front panel connectors there. You just plug them directly into this little plug, then that whole unit, the whole plug itself, plugs directly into the front panel connector layout there. Although I used it when I was assembling the motherboard, I end up having to remove it due to my SLI card setup, as the pin header itself was actually too high. These headers are also provided for the USB connectors. They come in extremely handy for this old case, as the front panel connectors for the USB were individually wired. Now I'm reinstalling the speed control switch for the fans. This switch is located behind the front panel and allows you to choose between 3 different fan speeds for the front fans, although the Antec fans I'm using have individual fan speed controls as well. As you install or plug in each piece of hardware, organise the cables as you go. It's often easier to turn the case flat on its side to install things like the CPU and other components. Only a small amount of thermal putty is required between the heatsink and the CPU. You can have too little and you can actually have too much. You need just enough to create a thin, even coat across the entire surface of the CPU. Every heatsink is attached differently. Read the manual supplied with your heatsink for the correct installation procedure. I always tension the screws of a heatsink in a particular order. I start in the top left hand side and then the second one I do is the bottom right hand corner. This provides a nice even tension across the surface of the CPU. This Thermalright heatsink I'm using is actually an aftermarket product designed for more efficient cooling. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit worried about the proximity of the heatsink itself in relation to the chipset cooler. Every motherboard's RAM configuration is different. Most new boards are dual channel and benefit from having two individual RAM modules, but they need to be installed in a particular order to operate in dual channel. Installing a video card is fairly simple. This motherboard has several PCI Express slots where a video card can be installed. I place it on the slot closest to the CPU as the airflow path for this case will give the best cooling in that position. Secure the video card with the screws provided with your case. Most motherboards come with extra USB or FireWire connectors for the back panel. Refer to your motherboard manual if they are not color-coded or keyed for particular spots on a motherboard. Next, I'm installing the floppy drive, which has been airbrushed to suit the case, and also the front fan bay, which allows me to control the speed of the fans in the case. Like many cases, this one uses a hard drive bracket. Secure the hard drives to the bracket, then secure the bracket in the case. With the front panel already on the case, install the optical drives through the front panel, line them up with the front panel and put screws in both sides. Now it's time to plug everything in. Work out what connectors you need to plug in, then plan your cabling before you start this process so the cables do not get twisted or overlapped. Plug in your IDE drives. PARTA connectors are keyed for easy installation. The PARTA cable I'm using for the CD-ROMs has an earthing cable on it, which just simply screws into one of the side brackets. The SATA cables are also very easy to install. I'm only plugging in one hard drive now for the initial install of the operating system. Most components in the PC require power from the power supply. I'm using a modular power supply, which means I only plug in the cables that I need. All power connectors are keyed and can only go in one way. New PCI Express graphics cards require power connectors. The N280 GTX from MSI has two different power connectors, one 8-pin and one 6-pin. The power supply I'm using has both. There are lots of ways to neaten up cables in your case. This type of cable wrap is available from most electronic stores. Installing this fan in the Perspex window of the side panel requires a little bit of extra care. If you over tighten the screws, you'll crack the Perspex. Neaten up and secure all power cables. I'm taping down the fan power cables which go between the motherboard tray and the side panel to ensure they don't vibrate when the PC is on. It is now finally time to finish assembling the case. Fill in the remaining spaces in your back panel. This will ensure you have correct airflow through the case. Before putting the final side on, the side panel fan needs to be plugged into the motherboard. Luckily, the Antec fans I'm using have exceptionally long cords.
So there you have it. I hope I didn't make it look too easy for you. I did spend over a day assembling this PC completely. Using things like cable ties gives you a more professional look and also a better airflow through your case.
The products in this video were sponsored by Altec Computers,